By default, only the JSON input and output formatters are used. Let's have a look at that request for the list of cities we already created. We don't explicitly pass through header values. That means that all that's passed through from Postman are the default headers and values Postman passes through. Important to notice here is that the accept header is set to accept anything. Let's send. And what we get back is JSON. That means that our API defaults to that. If we explicitly state that we want the representation that's returned to be in JSON format, and we do that by setting the accept header value to application JSON, we will also get back JSON, as is indeed the case. Now let's request XML by changing the header value to application/XML. And we still get back JSON. That's because no XML formatter was configured, so the API defaults back to JSON. Yet, this isn't exactly ideal. If a consumer of an API explicitly asks for an XML representation and we don't support it, we probably shouldn't just return JSON. We should return a message stating that we don't support it. Luckily, that's easy to do. Let's open our program class. Here, where we call in to add controllers on our services collection, we can also configure some basic API behavior. One of the things we can configure here is that when a consumer of an API asks for a certain representation and our API happens to not support it, that we return a message, in this case a status code, stating that we don't support it, instead of just returning the default. We do that by setting return HTTP not acceptable to true. Let's give that a try. We've got our previous request still lined up here. With this request, we're asking for an XML representation. We used to get back a 200 OK with JSON in the response body. Now we get back a 406 not acceptable. This is the better approach because it improves the reliability of the system as a whole. And it does that by not returning data the client hasn't asked for, because the client probably can't work with it. Anyway, another thing we can do is support an additional data format, like XML. Let's switch back to our code. After we call into add controllers, we can call into add XML data contract serializer formatters. This adds XML input and output formatters. So with this one line of code, we have just added support for XML to our API. Let's give that another try. We've still got the same request lined up. Let's send it. And there we go. This time we get back XML because we asked for XML. If we don't explicitly state that we want XML and we send the request, we still get back JSON. That's the default for our API. If you ever have the need to change a default output or input formatter, the rule is that the first formatter in the list of input or output formatters respectively is the default. So by manipulating the input formatters or output formatters list, you can decide on what the default should be. So far for working with formatters. One more thing to look into this module: getting a file.